Okay, well, good morning everyone and welcome to the joint CII Australian Government panel session on the significance of cybersecurity in a disruptive digital era. My name's Tim Martin. I work for Austrade, which is the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. We're the Australian Government's international trade, education and investment promotion agency. And I'd just like to thank you all very, very much for coming today. It's wonderful to see the number of people here in the room from all over the world. I think we're in for a very interesting discussion session. Austrade are delighted to be leading the second cybersecurity mission to India in conjunction with the Australian Cybersecurity Growth Network. Our 11 mission delegates are all Australian cybersecurity experts and have spent the past week travelling to Mumbai, Bangalore, and here they are now in New Delhi, where they're meeting with large Indian IT companies, multinational corporations and leading end users, exploring opportunities for collaboration. Over the coming decade, the digital economy will transform how Australians do business and connect with the world. Digital technology will increasingly underpin a wide-ranging aspect of the broader economy, and indeed by 2020, Australia's digital economy is projected to be worth nearly $140 billion, which is around 7% of Australia's GDP. However, whether the internet continues to create opportunities for growth and development will depend on it remaining open, free and secure. An increasing dependence on global ICT networks means that the potential costs of disruption are large and growing. Cyber incidents in Australia and overseas disrupt infrastructure and services, cause billions of dollars in damage to companies and threaten the integrity of government and private networks. At the extreme, a cyber attack could seriously compromise national security. Cybersecurity is an increasingly prominent industry and one that is vital to ensuring we can all enjoy the benefits of an open, free and secure internet. Here too in India, of course, an exponential growth in digital transactions, accompanied by increased threats from attackers, is going to expand the Indian cybersecurity market in an unprecedented fashion and will open up ways for our two countries to work closely. The Australian delegation is here to showcase their products and to explore possibilities for collaboration and to meet the demands for strong cybersecurity in India. Our mission participants have innovative solutions across the spectrum of cybersecurity demands, ranging from encryption technologies, awareness raising to authentication and penetration testing. Today, we're fortunate to be hearing from a panel of cyber experts. We're very pleased to welcome Australia's first Ambassador for Cyber Affairs, Dr. Tobias Feakin. We also have Loretta Joseph, who is the Chair of Australia's Digital Commerce Association, and so I read blockchain evangelist. Thirdly, we have Dr. Vikram Sharma, founder and CEO of advanced quantum cybersecurity company Quintessence Labs. We also welcome our other distinguished panellists, including Kapil Mehrotra, Head of IT at HCL Healthcare, Amolak Singh, Director IT Security, Securitarian Infologic Solutions, Vinayak Godse, Senior, the Director, Data Security Council of India, Colonel Suhail Zaidi, Head of ICT, CII New Delhi. And I'm also very grateful to Mr. Rahul Gupta of KPMG, who will be moderating the panel session today. Thank you, Rahul. But before we get underway, I just wanted to hand over to Dr. Tobias Feakin, who will give a short presentation on Australia's new international cyber engagement strategy. So thank you again for joining us, and I hope you find this morning's session fruitful.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. How are you all faring? I hope you had a good night's sleep and feeling rested and ready for a busy day today. Welcome to Australian colleagues who have spent this week touring around the vibrant Indian marketplace. I'm sure you have had every sense excited and exercised during your journey. India is a place that I've had the absolute honor of working in and out for the last 17 years. So it never ceases to surprise me, amaze me, and provide plenty of opportunity. So it's, I hope you're enjoying it. To our colleagues at CII, thank you very much for co-hosting and sharing your knowledge and expertise here today. It's an absolute pleasure. Yes, I'm the first Ambassador for Cyber Affairs for Australia. And I wanted to just share very, very briefly some of our key aspects of our international cyber engagement strategy. We feel it's something that's an increasingly important part of any international engagement that we have as a government, and we feel that it's important that we prioritize this in a very different way than the way we may have done in the past. I myself came from outside of government, and only in January this year took up the role. So it's a new model for Australia, and one that seems to be working quite well. I came from a background of think tanks where one of the biggest advantages you ever had was being in the middle of all sorts of different partnerships, be it the private sector, government, academia, civil society. That transfers itself surprisingly well into government, actually, in a role like this, because it means you understand that you will live or die by by how fluid your partnerships are and how profitable they can be for all. Cybersecurity, cyber affairs is something that we know as government we're never going to solve by ourselves. So it's great to be in a room like this to share a few elements of thinking. We look at cyber affairs as a broad issue, but actually fundamental to the whole topic is that we see it cyber affairs as an economic issue. This is essentially all about the economy. How do we ensure that we create the right enabling environment so that our digital futures are one that's profitable for all of us, for society, and for governments as a whole? We feel that that's something that's achieved best through an open, safe, secure internet, where, if you like, the government touch is fairly light. We feel that free flow of data and access is important to enable the kinds of innovations that all of you are trying to achieve in your business and working lives. But in terms of this strategy that we formulated, it's a very broad piece of work, and it's really trying to illustrate how cyber affairs touches all of our international partnerships. So if you'll indulge me just for a few minutes, and then I really want to hand over to the experts here on the panel who are going to guide you through the rest of this morning. I just want to touch on some of the few key themes. We launched in October, the 4th of October this year, and there's our Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, who helped us launch that in Sydney. We brought in a range of regional partners to ensure that it was a shared launch. It wasn't just about Australia, it was about our regional partners, about other private sector entities launching with us. And again, the first chapter is really about maximizing opportunities for economic growth through digital trade. And how can we as government enable that as best we can? How can we be that conduit to marketplaces rather than a barrier to market entry? So we're trying to help shape an enabling environment for digital trade, including through trade agreements, harmonization of standards, implementation of trade facilitation. And secondly, how do we promote trade and investment? And in many ways, this week's activities are an embodiment of that, having 11 Australian companies here to share their experience and learn from Indian experience as well. But if we don't underpin all of these developments with strong and resilient cybersecurity, we understand that none of us will actually benefit from all of those wonderful opportunities that exist. So we're very keen to always be learning in environments like this about how best to deliver cybersecurity in a way that is enabling rather than hindering. So we do it through various means, creating stronger relationships regionally and with international partners, trying to really provide as innovative and world-leading advice and solutions, and really promote Australia's cybersecurity industry and create more partnerships globally. We think one of the ways that this is all going to be unraveled as well is if we don't combat cybercrime in a more coordinated fashion. Private sector have a role to play in this equally as much as we do in government. You guys are probably seeing far more of the traffic at times than governments do, so we're acutely aware of that, and we know we need to be agile in the way that we work with you. So we try to raise cybercrime awareness. We build capacity in the Indo-Pacific. We've just invested $14 million over 4 years in capacity building, part of which goes towards building cybersecurity, and in other areas goes to building cybercrime capabilities too. Fourth, what does this mean? To promote a stable and peaceful online environment, well, most of you will read your newspapers and see that there's some sort of state activity going on. States are rubbing up against each other online. And we think that's counterproductive, not only for international relations, but also for international marketplaces too. If states aren't getting on well, then marketplaces tend to be impacted too. So there's always an economic imperative in all of this. We think that internet governance should be done and achieved through a multi-stakeholder approach. Again, governments should be light touch in terms of how the internet is governed. This is, we have a really resilient internet as it currently stands. We don't feel that a kind of overarching government influence on the way the internet is governed is a good idea. We think human rights apply equally online as they do offline. And we think that's something that's incredibly important to keep advocating for in all our relationships. And we also promote digital technologies to achieve sustainable development goals. And I'll be talking more about that this afternoon in a panel. But it's essentially to say that in all of our aid relationships, digital technologies are playing an increasingly important role. And we're trying to find ways of innovatively bringing the private sector and the startup community in to make them understand that there are budgets available here in the aid world, aid and development world, that are there for access. It can help you develop your products, innovative solutions, but it can also give you a great corporate message if needed. And then this is just the way we coordinate. My role is to coordinate across government, to try and understand what's going on in the private sector and internationally, and bring that together. And we do that very regularly through meetings that we hold and also consultations. So it was meant to be a kind of whistle-stop tour of what we're doing, and then for me just to sit back and let the real experts speak and let you have a discussion. But thank you for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to everything that now follows. Thank you. Rahul, shall I hand over to you?
Thank you, Toby. Good morning. Morning, everybody. This is indeed a pleasure to be part of this panel and be a moderator, a tough job. But I can tell you I'm in safe hands with Toby on my one side and Vinayak, so you can be rest assured. Let me just, kind of build a little bit of context to what we are discussing today, right? But the topic was given to us, CI thought of an Australian Commission again, the digital disruption and cybersecurity. I actually read it 3 times because both cybersecurity and digital disruptions has got so many dimensions to it, so many facets to it that it's really, really hard that in 20 minutes time we can deliberate in all of it. We will try and do justice to it. I just want to spend a couple of minutes to bring in few dimensions, few perspective, and I'll have then the experts come in from various aspects of it. Let me first talk about something from our personal life. Look at the way how digital disruption has changed our personal lives, right? What's your knowledge of information today? What's your source of knowledge today? Whom do you go to talk to? Today, people are connected, and technology is acting like a serious enabler and a disruptor by amplifying the potential of the people to seek knowledge, right? If you were to define value in today's time, it's not just about what you know, it's also about whom you're connected with. Now, I go 30 years back when I was probably a school kid. The sources of knowledge for me was probably dad, mom, teacher, Encyclopedia Britannica. Yeah. Today, my 8-year-old doesn't talk to me. I frankly can't remember the last time he came to me asking anything except for money. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that there is a human dimension of it, and it has fundamentally changed the way we interact. So that's one digital disruption in your personal lives. Let me take another dimension here, right? Has anybody noticed what's happening with the name of the companies changing? A lot of companies are turning and changing their names to digital. I get reminded of Shakespeare, who once said that rose would be as sweet, as going to smell, even if you change the name. So there is nothing in the name. However, did you see the notice of companies, Deloitte Digital, AT&T Digital, Tesco Digital, right? So the companies are changing their names to digital. Now, there are 2 things that you need to be worried about. First is the competitive advantage, right? And second is the perceptible aspect of it. Now, when you change the name of the company, right, it has got a far-reaching effect, and I'm telling you, digital disruption is here to stay. So for example, today if someone says that go Photoshop it, go Google it, right, or go and please Xerox it, you are actually changing this from noun to verb. Now, that's a fundamental shift. Remember, 2 decades back, a lot of companies changed their names to Infotech, X and Y, Infosys, Infotech. Today, it is digital. And believe you me, the impact, the ramification, this change is bigger, much bigger than you can imagine. Now, now let me come to the third dimension of it, we as a country. And yesterday we heard the minister talking about it. We are a nation of 1.3 billion people. We have got 1.28 crores of digital, and I'm quoting this from what we heard from the Union Minister on IT. We have got 1.2 crores of digital identities by virtue of Aadhaar, probably the single biggest platform of digital identities on biometrics in the world, right? We also have got about 500 million people connected. I get reminded of, rather I would like to quote a study by KPMG done this year on the CEO outlook. So we actually went around and spoke to about 1,200 odd CEOs across the world, from government, private sector, everybody, to ask them 2 questions. What is it that worries you? What are your priorities? The good news here is that 84%, about 84, 85% of the people, of the CEOs whom we interviewed, they said, yes, we see technology as an enabler. We don't see this as anymore a threat, so we see an opportunity there. Bad news is an equal number and more of the number of CEOs we interviewed across the world, KPMG found that they were extremely worried about the cybersecurity aspect of digital disruption. Companies are talking about making their investment goes 3 times, no less, in the investment of cybersecurity. So that's the paradigm shift. Now, coming back to the nation as we are, we are at the cusp of things. In the last 2 years, the way India has seen the adoption of technology, and it is fundamentally disrupting the way the citizens, they engage with each other. This is phenomenal, right? I'm very pleased to have a very eminent set of panelists with me to discuss this topic from the dimensions of partnership, policy making, cooperation, and cybersecurity for a safe environment for us to interact with. Let me come to you, Toby, first. You did talk about this very nice presentation. Thank you very much. It's very crisp. We get a lot of insight there. You talked about the cyber engagement and, of course, the multi-stakeholder involvement, the roles the private sector needs to play. So the question for you is, what do you think really is the real partnership of private sector with the government to make it a real multi-stakeholder collaborative approach towards cybersecurity for a nation?
I'll answer really quickly so everyone else can speak, because there's far more knowledge than I have here in our panel. But very briefly, I think as governments, it's about understanding, firstly, and I'll repeat again, you don't have all the answers as government. Being prepared and bold enough to engage and continually engage. I think there's nothing worse than if I was sitting in the private sector and I heard a government rep say, we want to engage with you, and you get one reach out, and that's about it. Now, if I was sitting in the private sector and government was saying, we want to consecutively engage with you, and you maybe 3-4 times a year hear from that government representative, that presents a very different balance, because then you build those kind of trust partnerships where actually you start getting more from each other. In a policy perspective, it's about, when we did our consultation for this document, it was about making sure that private sector voices, when they'd offered us opinions, they're actually represented in the document itself. Then there's this idea of co-ownership and a shared endeavor rather than something that you're just seeing as government leading on. For my position, that's through having an advisory panel of private sector entities who will help shape the agenda that we have at the beginning of a year and then also at the end of the year. So you start off the year setting the agenda, at the end of the year doing a review and maybe how we recalibrate, what do we do better. But I think, that, put simply, it's about that continual sustained engagement rather than feeling that it's just a one-off.
Thanks a lot, Toby. I think it's a good perspective that you bring in on how this can be a real collaborative approach from both sides. Lloyd, I want to come to you. You've been a blockchain evangelist, and we're going to hear a lot about Lloyd during the day. Question for you, Lloyd. What are the key initiatives in your view? What are really the key initiatives? I understand the Australian delegation has been here. Indian government has been very serious about partnerships. Indian government has been looking at how those initiatives can help for us as a community to grow. So what are some of those initiatives where both sides of the governments are working, and how is that helping get us to the next state of maturity on the cybersecurity, particularly from a policy perspective?
Oh, thank you, Rahul. I'd like to welcome you all here, and I'd just like to have a big shout out to my delegation who I had the pleasure of leading this week. They have been an amazing, awesome bunch of people to be around, and they've got some amazing capabilities, so please speak to them afterwards. So one thing I've noticed in the last couple of days, there is an absolute desire on both sides of the Indian and Australian fences to collaborate. Because in cybersecurity, as Toby just pointed out, it's all about the economy, but it's all about the same enemy at the moment. I do blockchain, and that was how I got into cybersecurity. The issue for me is I think the bad guys are very good at collaborating. Us on the good side are not so good. So for me, I think both capabilities across India and Australia, the regulatory sandboxing and piloting of the ability to test new technologies in the space, both the focus on consumer protection and financial stability of countries, and that's the macroprudential context and the systemic risk that comes out of cyber threats to states and the globe. I'm an ex-banker, so please excuse me. The restricted and structured, I guess, experimentation in this technology. Thing in what I do in blockchain, that's like your ICO guidance, released to let people in technology come in and work with governments and regulators to see how things go. Investor protection, websites on both sides is very important. Smart regulations now by governments, shared principles from a range of jurisdictions with the support of the financial markets and the private sector. For the industry itself, tax exemptions, looking at the way that we can get VC and funding opportunities across both sides. The importance of privacy, that to me is a particularly big one. The government's working with people that are experts. In our cybersecurity strategy, which Toby sort of mentioned on, the broad cyber affairs that I see, the key elements are digital trade, cybercrime, cybersecurity, international security, IT security, human rights, and the democracy online and the internet governance. We're at the moment underwriting a foreign policy paper, white paper, which is yet to be released, but it will certainly point out, and I think India is doing the same, the growing importance of cyber issues to foreign policy. The Australian government is very committed to a peaceful online environment, as is the Indian government. So I guess the key areas of technology that we can share is identity management systems, cryptographic techniques, hash technology. On the policy side, it's the adoption of blockchain. The players in the cyberspace, I guess then, AusCyber, the advisory, I sit an advisor to the Australian Cyber Growth Network. That's a key integral piece of industry and the government side. The PM's office on both sides, and the Australian Information Securities Association.
Thanks a lot, Roy. I think that's a very interesting perspective that you've brought in. And I take your point on the blockchain. We will be very keen to see how the policy formation on both sides helps blockchain adoption. I was there at the curtain raise, and there was a lot of discussion on how World Blockchain Forum is looking at blockchain as a next big serious disruptor. Okay, let me shift the gears slightly here, and I have Vinayak with us in the panel. So Vinayak, we've been 23 years looking into this very closely, being part of the policy frameworks. India saw its first privacy framework in the form of the Data Security Council of India, really coming out of it. On one hand, we are in this jet speed of digital disruption, the amount of data that is getting generated. I mean, honestly, for a country of our size, the kind of citizen engagement we are talking by 500 million internet connected users, 1.21 crores of Aadhaar. Where do you see privacy in the whole gamut of things, considering there is a very thin line in security and privacy, which is to be considered? Vinayak, your thoughts?
Good morning, everybody, and nice to be part of this panel discussion and this interaction. So you all must be knowing that India is a kind of a hub or powerhouse in terms of exporting the IT and business services out of this country. So any of those services that we have been doing for almost 80 plus countries all across the globe. Especially if you look at from the business services side or IT services side to an extent as well. Access to data remain an important part of those services that we have been offering. For example, any of the big IT company in India, they must be processing billion plus transaction in a day as a business process outsourcing or business process management services kind of thing. And each of those transaction would involve kind of a data that they would be processing as part of the transaction, be it processing a health policy or be it processing some telecom operation or doing marketing operation or financial operation out of the country. So the data protection for us, and that's what one of the important rationale and reason for setting up DSCI by industry body NASSCOM, is an important part. And initially our focus and attention was to see the challenges that we see in terms of data flow that comes to India as a part of this IT and BPO services outsourcing. So the entire, if you look at the international regime, which is now evolving from the data protection side, transfer of information is becoming very important part nowadays. Not only for now IT and BPO services, but even if it is goods transitioning from one country to other country, significant amount of the information that do get transferred. So in fact, there is a study by McKinsey which talks about data transfer amounts to almost $2.8 trillion in a year in terms of the digital threat that we all are seeing all across globe. So what we are seeing and what we started seeing since 2005-2006, the privacy is becoming an important part and probably coming as a very important standard for countries to engage into kind of a trade, digital trade, or be it now goods trades and services trade as well. So something like a child labor, it is coming as a very significant minimum standard that is needs to be satisfied. So for example, if you look at the European Union's Data Protection Directive and GDPR which is coming in, it talks about the data would be transferred to only to those countries where it has assurance about the data protection. And that's why the data adequacy norms had come, and probably maybe that was a push or maybe the domestic requirement, people have started amending or probably changing the data protection regime in the country. And that's we started seeing as part of DSA as well since our inception. So since our inception, we had been talking about taking this privacy agenda to the various different private as well as government entity. We had been working with the various different government of India's engagement with the other parts of the globe in terms of data transfer and issues that that also relates. Sometimes we as the Indian IT industry, we're not able to get access to the market because our data protection regimes is not that significant, and that's what we had a lot of problem with European geography till now. And we had a lot of interaction and engagement and deliberations with the European Union, and some of the negotiations also goes into that direction. But what we see, and that's the topic of today's discussion, is the digital disruption. So that really changes the rational and probably driver for the data protection. So digital disruption is primarily I see from the three perspectives. One is the improving the services that you offer to your client. Other is the improving the efficiency and productivity of the work that we do. And third is primarily work on the various different possibilities that you see as a part of digitization process. By using the location services, using the presence technology to using the whatever data context that is available to you, how can you offer those kind of services? We have seen in case of transport services, in case of Ola and Uber, just one or two contexts which are digitally recorded, like your presence is recorded because of GPS, the significant business value that can be achieved through the process of digitization. And that's what we are seeing, and this particular journey of digitization now is not only captured because we as the Data Security Council of India has a membership all across industry vertical. Now oil energy companies like ONGC and BPCL and HPCL, the kind of story they have been talking about digitization is quite significantly to see us how much digitization journey has been really capturing and probably they have been looking at. And in India, especially intervention of the government in the space of digitization, in the space of digital identity India, as Rahul was talking about, you just have to walk into one of the telecom service operator, you have to just give one biometric identity there, in 2 minutes your connection gets starts. So onboarding millions of the people on the various different digital services and products becomes such a easy with this kind of intervention government of India is trying to do. So what we are seeing now is, although rational for the being a part of digital trade or digital economy, global economy, the data protection becomes important, but our domestic reasons have also become very strong to bring that kind of the data protection region in the country. And then our footprint would be significantly increased. Digital footprint will significantly increase because of the so many things that private enterprise and government is doing in this country. And because of that, probably we are now seeing that India has been called as a data poor nation, may not be economically poor at this juncture, but probably will be another 5 years, it has been told that we'll become data rich nation. And in that case, then probably we need to look at data protection from the domestic strong region as well. And that is why I think there is a reason and there is a rationale and there's a development that you see in this country that has been taking to look at setting up. Means we already have something in place for data protection regime. Our Supreme Court has granted us a data privacy as a fundamental right. And now we have set up another committee which will be coming up with a comprehensive data protection regime in this country. So with this, I think I will just confine myself to data protection. We engage in many other initiatives and activities as well. But for the today's discussion, I'll confine with my discussion. We can have some of the lateral question answers in that. I can a little bit more on this one. So with this.
Thanks a lot, Vinayak. I like the way you brought in and weaved in the very need of our domestic reason, we as India. There is a ray of optimism here. We are seeing Government of India taking strides with respect to the data protection law. It's kind of in the works, December, January. So we certainly probably may not require a GDPR equivalent. However, something which is in the works, and DSCI is a very integral part of it. Vinayak and his team, they are contributing to it. Okay, I now move on to or rather let me take the cues from Vinayak, what you have mentioned, the data. And yes, data is the new oil. How do we go about looking at this whole concept of data with its so many dimensions, so complex, and how do we go about actually protecting it? I'm going to have Amolak Singh. Amolak, you've been a technocrat, also a CEO of a company, Security Solutions company. We would want to understand from you, what are those some of technology levers that can be seen from a data protection, or that can help us in a better, more optimized, and an actionable intelligence for a data protection? Yeah?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I would be talking on cybersecurity solution first. That's the main thing, We are interacting with a lot of corporate and government entities. I'm principal consultant with Digital India and e-governance bodies of India. And we have seen that still we are living in the past age. Wherever we go, the current situation is we are still depending on the firewalls and DLPs of the world, and the things at the attack side has been changed a lot. That's one thing. And what is the future? The future is the blockchain. We are working on those particular solutions in India. We are developing for the banks and for defense and police. And I will just give you a kind of orientation about the APTs we are talking about. See, everybody knows APT, right, Advanced Persistent Threat, but what exactly they are doing? We have just got a glimpse of ransomware WannaCry, right? That is hardly 0.001% of the attack they have done, and that too on a very vulnerable past kind of old OS operating system, right? But if we talk about the APTs now at this moment, which we have researched in our labs and all, they could be fileless. They could be memory resident. They could be even they don't require a user intervention, okay? Or maybe a broken malware, okay? There the encryption, the sandboxing kind of solution fails. So I was talking to different companies around the world, and I have a lot of questions like this, how they can protect from these kind of things, right? Now, people say that ransomware was a big attack, but they don't know all other attacks are also active in the world. If you can see the latest data, millions of attacks per minute is being thrown over the world. You can see that. And I would like to bring to your notice that disruptive technology is the only solution which all the cybersecurity solution will move to that. And how? Because say if we say encryption, again we are talking about the best thing the cybersecurity till today is the buzzword is encryption, right? But we have seen even AES or RSA, they can be broken, those keys can be broken, right? Now we are talking about the encryption in a quantum-based environment, right? And blockchain is the one which is a disruptive in all the ways. Every solution will normally, now it will be, in the coming future, they will be moving to the blockchain solutions. That's one. And we are working on 3-4 pilot projects with government and the corporates, right? So I would say that now what the cybersecurity solutions are, if we take the infrastructure and solution at the corporate level or maybe at the government level, they are just sitting ducks across the world, I would say, no matter where they are. And they are just feeling that they are in safe hands with these old technologies. I would say these are gone long back. We have to really wake up and take the new technology, take the new solutions, and really do the things from now. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Amalak. Truly, it is, the advanced threat protection is kind of a talk of yesterday. We're talking about advanced threat hunting, SOC orchestration, and so on and so forth. I think it's really important to stay tuned with the kind of trends that are coming up here and the solutions. And on the trends, I'm going to invite Dr. Vikram Sharma to share his thoughts on what are some of these trends, particularly from an emerging technology perspective, and how do we tie it back to the protection of the digital data, which is kind of being generated across the world. Dr. Vikram.
Thank you very much, Rahul. Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I think as all of my colleagues on the panel here have noted, there's no question about it, data powers everything that touches us today. As you rightly pointed out there, Rahul, I think The Economist magazine recently dubbed data as the new oil. I think very clearly you're seeing organizations, both public sector and private sector, recognizing this to be the case. As the recognition does occur, you find that they're realizing that the data can be leveraged not just for operational requirements, but also it has intrinsic value in and of itself. The data itself can be monetized. As this recognition is coming about, really the need to protect it well is something that we see all organizations looking to grapple with. I think as my colleague Amalak mentioned there, we've traditionally tried to do it through piecemeal encryption systems, and in some cases, encryption strategies, which are now starting to be challenged with the advent of advanced computational power. You certainly see with the advent of large supercomputers that are being built around the world, and potentially with quantum computing, a number of methods that we have used to date will be threatened. So we need to look for new solutions. I think the first step in that journey is, which a number of organizations have already embarked on, is trying to understand what IT assets they hold. Once you've understood that, I guess you can take a step back and look at what actually needs to be protected. Very often, and for many organizations, a lot of data can continue to sit in the public domain. But for those assets that do need to be protected, one of the best things that organizations can do is implement layered defense. I think we're seeing traditionally, we've had this approach about protecting the perimeter. So putting big walls around our IT assets and hoping to keep the bad guys out. We need to continue doing that, but clearly that's not enough. And that's why a prudent approach is this layered defense model. One of the very strong layers, if correctly implemented, is enterprise-wide encryption. But organizations, if you look at them, have been really struggling with this. Not so much because of the encryption piece. That is relatively mechanical once you've chosen a particular encryption cipher. The big problem comes with how do you manage enterprise-scale encryption in an environment where you have a diversity of IT infrastructure. Whether it's on the hardware side, you have IBM, Hewlett-Packard, EMC, et cetera, or on the software side, you have Oracle, SAP, and a plethora of organizations. That's been one of the real challenges that organizations have been struggling with. So we, in fact, have been working with a number of companies around the world in bringing about a standard called KMIP, which stands for Key Management Interoperability Protocol. It is the equivalent of TCP/IP for networks, but the same thing for encryption, which allows devices, hardware and software, to seamlessly interoperate. So I think that's one key piece of it. The second is, as we look to counter the quantum threat, where quantum algorithms, for example, today when we do key exchange, when you go to online banking and you type in your bankname.com, you'll get a lock at the bottom of your browser, which assures you that the information that you're exchanging with your bank is secure. That in turn, in most places, relies on something called RSA key exchange, which in turn relies on the difficulty of factoring very large, what are called semi-prime numbers. One of the things that a quantum computer will be able to do very well is factorize exactly those numbers. So that puts at risk some of the methods that we today have implemented for our public key infrastructure, which in the end is the backbone of our electronic commerce. So there are, again, emergent technologies, interestingly enough, again, drawing on quantum effects, which can help mitigate against some of that. And Australia is, in fact, a global leader in this field in areas around quantum cybersecurity. So we're very keen and engaged in a dialogue with a number of counterparts here in India to see if we can use India's powerhouse software development capabilities and software service capabilities and complement them with Australian expertise in quantum cybersecurity to really deliver bilateral, truly globally unique solutions.
Thank you, Vikram. I think you've paraphrased it really well to say that bilateral relations, bilateral cooperation, and the kind of outcome that we are expecting. I think that really gets us to another dimension of it. That how do industry bodies, they kind of collaborate and they work with the governments for policy formation. Colonel Sohail Zaidi, I'm not going to ask you how defense is handling digital disruption, but I do intend to, we need to understand from you that being a knowledge body, and you have seen it from very close quarters, how do you see, what is the kind of real involvement that you see from knowledge bodies as far as the cyber policy formation is concerned? Particularly when we look and talk about a country of our size, where there are connected citizens and some of the largest implementations. Yeah.
Thank you, Rahul. Just to give you the background, we in CII have a membership of 8,500 direct members and 250,000 associated members. And as Rahul brought out, almost all companies as of now are the technology companies. And Rahul also brought out that most of the CEOs have expressed that the amount of investment gone into the cybersecurity thing has increased. But I would just like to bring out that whatever little interactions we have had, we have noticed that the ownership has still not gone beyond the CIO level. It has not reached the CEO. In case there is something wrong which happens, the question which generally the CEOs ask is how bad is it rather than how did it happen. So that is one of the things. Now, with regard to the policy, as Rahul mentioned, we are closely interacting with the government, all the associations, we being one of them, in getting the policies right. What we try to convey from the industry's view is that certainly the national security is of the prime importance, but we also need to understand the global actions being taken, the technology transfers, we have to cater that as well. Secondly, we also propagate that the indigenous companies should be given importance, but again, the companies who are from outside the borders of our nation should also be given equal advantage. And we also recommend in the policy that the experts' advice should be taken. The knowledge partners, the people who are exactly the experts, they should be catered in the policy formation rather than people who have got lesser knowledge and have got more say in it.
Thank you, Colonel Zaidi. I think those are really important pointers in terms of the involvement of knowledge bodies, because that really drives the focus and steers a direction to where the nation needs to be heading to. You brought in a very interesting aspect on the reaction of most of the CEOs of the company whenever there is an outbreak. So more often than not, the chances that you're going to hear is that how bad it is, how soon can I come back? Now, that really gets us to think, are we still in the age of reactive response or proactive response? Okay. I'm very pleased to have couple who is with us, and he comes from an IT services company, but looks into the healthcare, so which means that in a way it's kind of double whammy. You're looking at both IT services as well as the records, because which has got a direct implication and has got a lot of privacy element to it. Couple, from you, like to understand that what is the paradigm shift that we need here from a more reactive than proactive approach towards cyber incident response?
So it's one of the very hot topic. I mean, it's a very interesting. So let me tell you something from the industry perspective. If you look at it, an organization which has a CIO and which has a digital team as well, CDO, Chief Digital Officer, and some of the larger companies, they have a CISO as well. So whenever we talk for the security, so it's a bit confusing because who is the owner of the data? Tomorrow something happened, who is going to basically respond over that? So it's but natural if that organization has a CISO, so he is going to act it. If some of the organization, they don't have a CISO and only CIO, and CIO closely working with the digital team, so in that case, who is going to be basically own it, that piece? That's one of the big question, because digital don't collaborate very easily with the CIO. They works in a silo, and they basically create such kind of application, transactional applications. Like digital, we are talking like nationwide digital application, like Beam is one of the largest application worldwide now these days. We are talking for the Aadhaar. We are talking for blockchain, Bitcoins. That is one of the transactional application is happening one side. Social media is a part of your organization. It's pumping feed of lot of information, which day night every day coming, and every damn information you are sharing on a social media, personal, private, professional, business, every information you are sharing over on the social media. And social media is a part of a digital team which is working in the silos, and CIO is looking after the security. He is responsible for the security. So this is one of the phenomenon everybody in the organization will live with it. And just imagine is one incident happened and we will look after each other. Who is going to respond to this? Who is going to own it? Who is the owner of the organization? CEO, COO, CIO, or digital, or maybe third party? We have to look for third party to address this. So there are certain statements are very well, I have articulated those, and whenever any incident happen. So if you go to someone, let's say I'm a CEO of organization, and as a CISO I'm going to there. So first of all, if I put the concern, okay, I want to basically implement the best security system. So the first answer I'm going to hear is later, not this year. This may be, there is a second case wherein like I'll say, I have a best of the best security system, still I'm compromised. If I'm compromised and then I'm going to CEO, please find out the way this information should not leak out in the media. So exactly happened with the Ola recently. And like that, like there are underlying, so you wish to have it as a CIO, best of the best security system, but you are not basically able to. Reason is because people are not adopting it, your idea. So this is one side of it, and other side, if I look at if something happened, so where I have to go and report it. And I have a saying here, and it's a piece of advice. Whenever we compromise, we have to report immediately that incident. We should not wait for it because the consequences of that is very high. If you are not reporting it, somebody come to know that, and he will drag you in the court anytime. You cannot avoid that. So first thing is, as a first responder, it's our duty. We have to report the incident. We should not wait. And we should report the incident to the cyber cell. Every country has a cyber cell where we have to respond that. Second thing is, whenever you are reporting to any incident, so how are you going to measure the damage of the incident? Because we are now these days more open towards the digital. And if, let's say, I'm a $10 billion company and something happened to my company, how I'm going to estimate it? What is the cost of a damage? How much data I have lost? What critical data I have lost? Personal, professional, medical, what information I have lost it? There is no science, there is no way out. Once you lost it, you cannot bring back that. But you can estimate the damage of it. And it's difficult to evaluate the cybersecurity damage. And crux is, you have not thought through in the inception what security system you need it. What pros and cons going to be happen. So in a whole game, like I have categorized pre and post kind of people, pre and post kind of organization. Pre means like organization are very concerned. Tomorrow something happened, what is going to be basically. So I need best of the best security system. I have a right classification of the data. What data is critical, business critical, non-critical, can be shared on the social media. What all the basically policies around it I am having it for the organization, for the nation, right? Wherein I can come upfront, okay, this much information you can share in the media, social media, anywhere. But rest of the information, for that you need a lot of permission, you need a proper counseling, governance permission, then you can disclose it. Now these days, a lot of digital interfaces are coming, and where we are basically looking for the integration, right? So whenever we talk for the integration, what information you are basically passing to the third party vendor. I'm talking for the e-commerce, I'm talking for the healthcare, I'm talking for the financial transaction, financial companies. So what kind of information? You are in an impression, you have a sign an NDA and you have given the information to them, but how they are basically handling your information. So this is one of the thought, right? Because it's a one place where you have to put a lot of effort and think, and then you decide it. So with this saying, like, I'll end up my discussion. Thank you.
That's very interesting. I think very rightly brought out in the event of fire, whose responsibility is. Who's going to raise the hand to say, hey, listen, I'm going to own this and let's sort this out. An equally interesting or rather important aspect to is about the whole handling of cyber incident is how do you go about reporting it? Whom do you report it and how do you report it? Dr. Toby, I want to come to you, and this is a question I have. You've been part of cybersecurity strategy at a state level. In 2012, you've been part of the committee which actually saw the 2016 cybersecurity strategy. You've seen it in close quarters. What is the kind of support government provides? Should there be a report of incident, be it cyber hacking or any of that sort? So what's the kind of support that the government of Australia, any use cases or leading practice that you want to share about?
Okay, so I can tell you very directly about the discussion that we had. So I was part of an independent panel of experts who helped advise the 2016 Australian cybersecurity strategy. And actually the whole issue of data breach reporting came up. And at the time, as a group, we were very hesitant to legislate for it. We felt that it was something which was about changing the culture of admission. And rather than create if you like, use the stick rather than the carrot. We didn't want to use the stick. We didn't want heavy-handed legislation to come in, which meant that every breach had to be reported. So we left that question open, but it's subsequently changed. And it's so tough because, of course, we appreciate there are such sensitivities around share price and around a company's future prosperity if they admit to a large-scale data breach. But it's about any company asking the question, well, if we don't have a plan and this goes wrong, well, then we could end up in a far worse place. And I think you've seen all manner of examples where companies clearly haven't prepared for any sort of data breach, and the way that they have either mishandled it in a public setting has led to pretty disastrous consequences. But we've also seen, conversely, other companies who, despite millions of files going missing, have had good plans clearly in place to be able to reach out to the public, reassure them, show that they've got strategies in place to make sure that the customer base is reassured in terms of what they're doing. But we have subsequently now got mandatory data breach reporting legislation in place, which will soon come into effect. And I think it's next year that I could really comment more fully on what that's done to the ecosystem, what kind of cultural shifts that's promoted. So it's not meant to be a get out, but I think next year you'll start to see that take effect in Australia, and you'll see, and we'll have a better sense of, is the legislative approach working better than the supportive approach?
Thanks, Toby. I'm sorry to put you on the spot on this. No, we wanted, okay. I think it's really important that legislation is the way to go as far as, this is a sensitive matter. How do you go about reporting it? And there are whole sort of cultural sensitivities involved in it. I'm being reminded of the time that we have. We can take questions from the audience, but really 2 questions. Okay, questions from the audience, yeah, go ahead, please. Could you please introduce yourself, your name, and what's your question? Right, you want to take this?
Hello. Dr. John Selby, Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia.
Pleasure.
We've had a discussion of data as being the new oil. And for oil companies, it's quite a profitable thing until you have an Exxon Valdez run aground. And I think one of the challenges is a valuation model for data. At the moment, like the big banks, when they treated loans only as assets, they had an incentive to issue as many as possible because that gave them more assets. When the GFC hit, we saw that those assets were also liabilities. So I'm wondering whether there's been any movement in India to have a requirement that companies value their data both as an asset and potentially as a liability. And so that was one thing. The second thing was the issue of blockchain. We've seen it go through quite a hype cycle. The Gartner hype cycle is quite well known. In Australia, we've started to have sessions on getting beyond the hype and looking at the real world use cases. So it's interesting to see that there's still quite a very large discussion in India on blockchain being widely used in many places. We've seen a bit of a retreat in Australia from that to more focused approaches where we think it will have the most advantages. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on whether that is a trend in India as well.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll have Vinayak, you to talk on the data side of things. But on blockchain, India has taken a cognizance of it. We haven't said that this is, so we're not like JP Morgan's. We haven't said that don't use it, but we have said that caution and care. That's a kind of prerogative we have taken, and my colleagues from the industry body, they can comment better on the blockchain. Certainly beyond the hype, what is the real implementation advantage that we can draw both on the supply chain and the financial services and across. So it's in the build-up, it's in the works. But on the data side of things, I think, Vinayak, do you want to comment on how it's...
Yeah, so I was talking about country becoming from data poor to data rich nation, and that is how I see the significant level of confidence in policy making that probably we have those resources. So 1 million plus population doing so many of transaction, and Aadhaar being or biometric identity becoming a very important part of getting people onboarding. And apart from the key master data that you have, there will be significant level of transaction data that will be available. And this transaction data and individual's personal information data and all of those digital products and services and platforms that we are seeing, so significant amount of data that will be generated, and the quantum and complexity of data will be significantly higher in coming 4 to 5 years of time. So so it doesn't really talk about at this point of time, but yes, in data protection policy making, and we are part of that engagement that government has started in terms of defining the privacy of the country. So this is definitely very important consideration. So this richness of data and the commercial value that flows out of this, how exactly country leverages benefit out of it, that is one part. And secondly, how can it helps? And that help is very important part. For example, there are a lot of policy discussion which is happening. So one of the discussion I always hear is the data. We are in the cloud computing context and platformization context. We hear the interaction that we import technology and export data. Because most of data doesn't really stays in India, and that's one of the concern that I heard from policymakers side. So definitely the value of data is driving those kind of now discussion in the country, and definitely this is a very important discussion. Data localization also comes from those kind of requirement. So we are deliberating on those things, trying to look at how industry looks at different sectors of the governments are looking at.
Thank you, Mac. Right.
Hello.
Yes, please.
I'm Vijay from Mahindra Groups. Okay, I'm the CISO. The question here is, as far as the data is concerned, as you mentioned, it's an oil. There is always a possibility of spill. But for the spill, of course, encryption is one part, but the other part is the rights management is the primary concentration that need to be done. We keep hearing the Olas, the Uber, and in fact, many other things. We can keep quoting multiple things. Let us not name anything specific. The leakage is primary because of the fact that the right management of that particular data is not well stated. So if at the source we are able to encrypt it one part, we need to also concentrate on the digital rights management or the information rights management at the source. If that is given the impetus, there are solutions, multitude of solutions, but the problem is the authors of that particular data do not execute it in the right way. And that need to be the stress, and absolutely things will totally change. That's my take. Probably you'll have a couple of views around that particular thing. Probably Dr. Vivek could. Vikram, right? Sorry.
Absolutely. Digital governance needed on top of the solutions, because solutions can only do as much. They are only as intelligent as it want to be. Digital governance is what is needed. So Vikram, do you want to comment on that?
Thank you. That's an excellent point you make. And absolutely, there are a number of things which are critical to data protection. Encryption is almost the mechanical piece to enable. Perhaps where the greatest value arises for organizations is around the implementation of data security policy, and which will flow down typically from the board level these days around your data security governance directives. Abilities for organizations, I think I started to talk about classification of their data. And as part of that classification, not only are you trying to determine what is sensitive and what's not, but for what's sensitive, who should have access to it and under which conditions. And capabilities, technologies that allow you to implement and enforce that rights management or data security policies will be critical as we move forward, not only to allow us finer-grained security control, but potentially even to avoid insider threat issues or being somewhat on the front foot around insider threat. Because in more advanced systems, you can build in not only who has access and who doesn't, but you might build in various kinds of rules or heuristics that might put rate limits. So for example, with an encryption key, you can do X number of encryption or decryption. Or you could use it to encrypt or decrypt Y gigabytes or megabytes of data. Or in a day, you could, if you access credit card numbers, for example, that you'd only access up to a total of 1,000, for example. So I think that's a very pertinent point that you make, and something which a lot of organizations are starting to think very carefully about. But we, I believe, if you look at it globally, are at the beginning of that journey.
Okay. I've been again reminded of the time, so all of the panelist speakers are here during the day. So if you have questions, you can chat with them during the breakout sessions and the lunch hours. With this, we come to the close of this session. It has been quite an insightful one with hearing all dimensions from the perspective. When I started the session, I said that I actually did it 3 times. And now I believe the kind of insights one has got, both from digital disruption and the need for having cybersecurity, it's truly there. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Before we leave, just from the Australian Commission and CII, a memento of thanks to all the speakers. Dr. Toby. Okay, right. Why don't you just hold this? Loretta, thank you very much for joining us. Vinay, great insights. Thank you very much. Amalok, thank you. Thank you. Right, we've got Red. Oh, we have got the actual. Oh, all right, Kapil, thank you very much. Thank you. Joining us. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the conference and have a great day.